Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's IEEE-USA webinar and our first webinar of 2026, Mission Critical Money. I'm your host, Jonathan Cho. Our presenter for today is IEEE member David Sandu, returning to share more essential insights on planning and strengthening your financial future. David formerly worked for SpaceX, Raytheon, and Lockheed Martin as an engineer before he transitioned to the financial services industry. After his father passed away, David helped his mom through some tough financial questions, and that gave him the spark to pursue a career in financial planning. David is passionate about serving others and lives by Zig Ziglar's famous saying, "You can have everything in life you want if you'll just help enough other people get what they want." He knows firsthand that true happiness is experienced when helping others. Without further ado, I will now pass it off to our presenter. Welcome back, David. We're very excited to hear what you have in store for our audience today.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I appreciate that and appreciate IEEE-USA for another opportunity to kick off 2026 talking about mission critical money. This is a really interesting topic as I think about kind of the future of the future landscape of engineering and finances and our careers. So the subtopic here is how understanding money decisions and trade-offs make you more valuable, trusted, and promotable. And I actually did this workshop for another company kind of towards the end of last year. And it's so interesting how much has already changed in the AI world. And so before we jump on into the presentation today, I would love to know maybe what part of the country you are calling in from, and maybe what what company you work for. So feel free to drop it in the chat box. Maybe drop in what part of the country you're calling in from, and then what company you work for. So let's get right into it. A quick disclosure here before we get started. Anything we discuss is not meant to be taken as specific tax, financial, or legal advice. Everything we discuss is meant to be general information and educational in nature. So I want to start off with this very simple question. How do you feel about AI and the job market right now? I am curious. How do you feel about the AI and the job market right now? Are you feeling positive? Is your trajectory for confidence growing with AI in the job market right now? Are you fully confident in what's happening? Do you feel overconfident, but you feel like, man, things are getting pretty, pretty good and have been too good for a while here? Are you surprised? Maybe things are starting to shock you, where maybe you thought that they would have that would have taken a couple more years. Are you nervous? Are you maybe thinking, I'm not sure how this is going to affect me or my family or my retirement or my career? Or are you panic stricken? Are you on the downhill trajectory, thinking about all the what if scenarios? Or do you feel defeated? Do you feel like, David, I don't know what to do. I'm hearing all these conflicting opinions and ideas, and I feel torn about my retirement and my money and my confidence and my career trajectory and my if there was a promotion, I'm not sure if I would be slated for it. And yeah, thanks to everybody for commenting here. So I'm seeing a couple of confidence remarks here. I see a couple of nervous comments here, and that's good. I think people are all over the place when it comes to understanding, AI and the job market right now, and I think it's well validated. Right, this is a new arena that we're all stepping into, and so I'm hesitant to use the word unprecedented just because I feel like that word is overused. But I think 2026 is going to be a very interesting year in the job market. So for starting off here, why does this matter now, right? You might even be curious, like, what is this whole topic about? The workplace, I mean, from what I can see, the workplace is undergoing some significant transformation here, and I think 2026 is going to be one of those pivotal years. As we adopt more and more AI, it's changing a lot, but at the end of the day, it's just changing tasks. At least right now, it's changing how some of the work gets done. It's not necessarily changing who decides what work is getting done. So it's not really changing a lot of judgment and how you can differentiate yourself, right? Because that's what we're talking about today, is basically, how do I stand out in a crowd, in a room full of chatbots and AI and other people using AI, my peers? Technical skills, maybe that differentiated top performers, right? Let's say you are the junior engineer in your department. I remember my first week when I started in Skunk Works, when I worked at Lockheed Martin. I think I was in my 20s, and the next oldest person was in their like late 50s. And so there was a pretty big gap between from an industry level perspective. Technical skills that typically differentiated those top performers, those are becoming kind of table stakes, because you can learn very quickly in a very niche environment what you need to do to become successful technically from a technical competency perspective. So when we start thinking about how decisions actually get made, why priorities are shifting, how do we talk to the customer, how do we sell to the customer, what leadership is really truly valuing, those are the things that are going to differentiate you as a strong engineer in 2026 and beyond. And so the most valuable people in really any organization aren't just good at their jobs. They understand the big picture. They can look at the problem that they're working on and then zoom out and understand the context on how their work is going to affect the outcome. So the employees that get noticed, right? There's always going to be those employees that always seem to be proactive, that seem to have a positive attitude, that seem to take extreme ownership of the work they're doing. Those are the ones that leadership is going to start trusting more and more with these complex projects, especially as AI, right, starts integrating into more and more fields. And so those people, those engineers that can see the big picture, right, they understand how their work fits into the broader company. They can understand trade-offs. So rather than pushing for perfection, they're really understanding and managing risk. I think a lot of what my job is as a financial advisor for my clients is managing risk. It's helping them identify risk and then manage and mitigate against it. They connect decisions to outcomes, right? So they don't just execute, they don't just do the task. That's what a lot of AI can do. It can just do the task. But really good employees that stand out, they think through the implications. They anticipate what's going to happen, maybe 2 or 3 steps down the road. And they understand potentially more ripple effects across the organization. At a high level, they are more systems level thinkers. And then finally, they reduce risk for leadership, right? Because the employee that is consistently tapped for bigger opportunities, they're bringing solutions, not just, hey, I hit a roadblock and I can't seem to get to the next milestone. They're bringing opportunities. So this workshop is not meant to be a finance class. We're not going to talk about budgeting and investment strategy. But what it is meant to be is it's meant to help you think about how leaders think, right? Because in the age of AI, where many work, right? And I always there's another colleague that we talk about this all the time. If you're just sitting in front of a computer all day and you're not talking to anyone, it seems like those jobs are prime real estate for AI. And so as we start thinking about how we can stand out, what we come to realize is finance and specifically about value creation. That's the language that decision makers use to start evaluating options, to assess risk, to allocate resources. And so when you speak the language of finance, not just about budgets and spreadsheets and personal finance, but also corporate finance, you can start getting noticed a little bit more than the other people. So how do companies really make money, right? If you ask any CEO, if you take away all the jargon and the org charts and the RACI charts and the green, blue, or black line, wherever you're on, if you start thinking through what is the job of the CEO, it's to take dollars, it's to take capital, and it's to multiply that capital. It's to turn $1 into 10 or $1 into 100. And so behind every successful company, right, whether it's a startup or a Fortune 500, they do these 3 things very well. Number one, they focus on creating value, right? So they develop products, services, and solutions, right? So you might think of this like a Shark Tank, right, type of environment. They're creating value. This is where innovation, product development, customer insight, all that is there. They create the value, then they have to start capturing the value, right? So how do we sell this, right? How do we sell this to a customer or to the government or to our local community or to someone on the other side of the world, online? How do we capture that value? That's turning the value creation into sales, right? So effective pricing, sales, marketing, customer relationships. Value creation doesn't really mean anything, right, without value capture. And so if you've created a great product but you can't sell it, or you're not doing a great job of promoting it, it seems like the value is gone. Okay, and then the third area is managing risk. So protecting the business from threats, whether it's financial or operational or reputational or competitive, all mitigating those risks to make sure that the value is still being created there and that the value is being captured upon. So I'm actually just curious, maybe just type in the chat box, which one of these do you, in your role right now, do you feel like you're most responsible for creating value? So developing products, services, solutions. Are you more responsible for capturing the value, right? So converting that value into a revenue stream. Maybe you're meeting with the customer. I know when I worked at Raytheon, I was flying out to the customer, typically every other month and trying to, sell the customer on what we're trying to build. So are you more focused on creating value, capturing value, or maybe you're in a role where you're just managing risk? Maybe, and that's neither good nor bad, right? But you're focused on, hey, I want to protect the value that we've created from outside threats. So I'm curious, type it in the chat box. Are you focused on creating value, capturing value, or managing risk? And I see people are dialing in here from YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook. So feel free to drop your comments here in the chat box. I'm curious to know. And why does this matter? What does it matter whether we are creating value or capturing value or managing risk? Once you understand the core functions, right, that seem sometimes random at work, that's going to help you. That's going to help you fuel kind of where you're trying to go in your career. So if you can help explain shifting priorities, right? So when market conditions change, or your competitors make a move, or your company has to shift. One thing that's interesting, when I worked at L3Harris, there was an internal phrase that I think is now their slogan, but it was the trusted disruptor. That's what they were trying to really focus on becoming. That name was to be the trusted disruptor, and they were trying to be that company that's being able to be very nimble, even though they were a very large organization. So, are you able to explain shifting priorities at work? Are you able to explain rejected ideas, right? So again, you might be personally creating value for the company, but can you explain that value, right, to your peers or to your boss or to your manager, or when you do your performance reports? Are you explaining that your value creation? And then explaining leadership questions, right? So when executives probe about costs or timelines, or tell me more about, what's happening with your project, they're not being difficult, right? They're trying to figure out where is the value that you're creating. So what these seemingly random workplace decisions sometimes don't make sense, you have to start thinking back to your work and say, can I be that value creator, or can I be that value capturer, or can I help manage the risk, right? Alleviate the risk from some of these key areas. So leaders don't ask, right, is this perfect, right? One of the biggest misconceptions about leadership is that senior people are looking for a flawless solution. And I trust me, I remember when I was at SpaceX, we didn't really care if it was flawless. We just wanted a prototype. So we would try to, design something on Monday and test it on Tuesday and, and rebuild it on Wednesday and blow it up on Thursday and then fly it on Friday, right? I'm being silly, but it was very, very fast paced. They're not looking for perfect solutions. They're looking for clear thinking about trade-offs, right? Are you evaluating, right? What problems does your job function solve? Can you articulate the specific issue that you're addressing in your position? Can you explain the trade-offs, right? What are we giving up by choosing this path or this other path? What becomes harder if we move forward? What happens if we delay? What's the risk if we're wrong, right? If this doesn't work out, what's the worst case scenario? Can we recover from it? Or how long will it take us, whether it's time or money, to get back on track? And does this move us forward, right? So even an imperfect decision, sometimes that's all you need to create momentum, is often better than sitting on the sidelines doing nothing, right? Getting into that analysis paralysis. So how can you think like a decision maker? And really, that's at its core, when you think about what you're doing day to day, the people that are good at making strong decisions and really following through, those are the people that stand out, right? Great decision makers follow a consistent mental model, whether they maybe know it or not. They're doing this, right? So they're following, and you can steal this framework. The 4-step framework is how effective leaders evaluate everything from hiring decisions to the software they should be using to strategic pivots, right? And you can make it your default way of thinking. So the first step on the framework is to define the goal, right? Be very specific about what success looks like, right? And we all know this saying, garbage in leads to garbage out, right? So if you have a very, very vague goal, it leads to vague decisions, right? So if I woke up on January 1st and said, this is my year that I'm going to lose 50 pounds of weight off my body, it's like, well, that's good. You have a somewhat of a vague timeline and you have somewhat of a vague goal, but what does that look like from a month-to-month perspective? What are the inputs into actually accomplishing that goal from a day-to-day perspective? There's actually a really good book called, I think it's called the next 90 days, or your next 90 days, how to accomplish more in the next 90 days than most people do all year. Fantastic way to think about taking those big rocks of goals and breaking them down into mini milestones. The second area is to identify trade-offs. So list what you're gaining and what you're giving up, right? Every choice has both, right? Every choice has a trade-off. What you're giving up something, but you're gaining something, right? We're spending more, but we're gaining time, or we're spending more time on this, but then we're losing money, right? So identify those trade-offs. Assess risk. And you know what's funny is you can apply this in so many different areas of your career, right? So, hey, my goal is this year is to, be the best at XYZ, or to get the promotion, or to push my company forward in these key areas. You can use this in a lot of different frameworks. The third area is to assess risk, right? So what's the worst that could go wrong, right? What could go wrong? How likely is it? Can you mitigate or accept it, right? When I worked at Raytheon, there was a risk severity matrix, and it was basically an XY axis, and it said, the likelihood or the probability of something happening and the severity of something happening on the y-axis. And at the inflection point of when something was most severe and most likely to happen, those are the risks that you want to focus on. And then the fourth area is to decide and move, right? So commit to making some movement, right? Whether it's in your career or with your finances or with your health or whatever that area is, right? Or trying to get that promotion or whatever that is. Good enough executed beats perfect on paper, right? So I think someone else has said, right, good is better than or done is better than good, right? Because people say, well, I want something better, but just do it, right? So just get something done. And again, we see these trade-offs show up everywhere, right? So the ability to see and articulate trade-offs is probably one of the most underrated and underutilized professional skills. But there's all these trade-offs that we have to think about. And in fact, it's funny, there was one of my first jobs out of college was working at NASA at JPL over in California, near Pasadena. And on the wall in the lunchroom, they had this little poster, and it said, good, fast, and cheap. So good, fast, and cheap, you pick two. Right. and this is all about trade-offs, right? They show up everywhere. So how can I stand out as an engineer, as an individual contributor, as a program manager, as a leader in my company, or want to be a leader, right, in my company? It's about understanding these trade-offs. It's about addressing these trade-offs, and it's about demonstrating that you understand the trade-offs, right? These trade-offs show up everywhere. It's speed versus certainty, right? It's cost versus quality. It's short-term wins versus long-term trust. And here's the kicker, right? Avoiding decisions is still a decision, right? Not deciding to do something because of a risk is still a decision. And so sometimes inaction has consequences just like action does, right? So you might be seen as someone who's not someone who follows through. So the question isn't whether to make the trade-offs, it's which ones to make consciously. Okay, so if I want to stand out in the age of AI, I have to be able to show up and be able to demonstrate my value by making these trade-offs and expressing the concern when it arises. So take everything I've just said and then throw AI in the mix here. What AI is really doing very well, at least from what I've been able to see across different aerospace and defense sectors and other engineering companies, is that AI accelerates decisions, right? So you can use AI to help accelerate decisions, but it's not going to replace your judgment, right? It's very good at replacing, tasks, right? Daily tasks, repetitive things. It can sometimes provide a little context, but it's not. At least from what I've seen, it's still lacking a lot of that context that we as humans provide. So AI is transforming, right? How quickly we can process information, right? It can read, thousands of books in minutes and then help to generate options, but if we're not harnessing it, right, it can process information, right? So, but we need to provide the context. So a lot of times we need to, as humans, be the better human, right, than AI. We can understand nuance, right? We can know that a specific team member or a specific customer or someone on our team maybe thinks in a certain pattern. it understands, right, organizational politics, right? It might know that someone's a manager, but not necessarily the leader. It might know someone else is the leader, but not necessarily the manager. It you know the unwritten rules. You know your own cultural dynamics, and it's unfortunately it's really hard right now to figure out how to capture that with an AI algorithm. So at the end of the day, right, AI is changing the game, okay? But you, as an engineer, as a leader in your company, one way to stand out is to provide accountability, right? Because AI is not going to take accountability for when things go wrong. You as humans, you and I as humans, we have that opportunity to stand up, take ownership. So when things go wrong, we answer for them, right? So that responsibility, that taking extreme ownership of maybe it's your job or your job function or your team, that's going to help you stand out in this new economy. So AI is taking, the capabilities are expanding, but the skills that make you irreplaceable become very clear, right? Because if AI capabilities are expanding to tasks and repetitive things, and maybe creating content, but it's all preformed. What are the things that we as humans where can we shine? The first area, I think, is judgment, right? So the ability to weigh competing factors, understand nuance, assess situations that maybe have not occurred before, and then make the judgment call when maybe the right answer isn't extremely obvious. And there's a lot of things to weigh when you're working with another company as well. So AI can inform judgment, but it cannot replace judgment. Okay, so that's the first area. The second area is trust. For whatever reason, right? We're designed to trust other humans, right? Humans are designed, at least inherently, I think, to trust other humans, right? So I would rather take advice, maybe about a relationship from another human rather than a chatbot. And so relationships, credibility, and the confidence that others have in your intentions and capabilities, that's something that AI can't replace. Trust is built through that consistent behavior. And it's actually funny, I was just reading a paper, an article about this, that where they're testing AI to run, similar types of therapy sessions for people. And people still prefer looking at someone eye to eye when making these decisions, because they feel like they know them better than an AI chatbot, even though an AI chatbot might remember things from years ago that you said that the person might not. Context. Understanding why certain approaches work in your organization and maybe why they wouldn't work in another organization. So what's the subtext, right? Maybe AI can understand some context, but it can't understand the subtext of what's actually happening, right? Because context is messy, right? AI, at least right now, cannot read nonverbal cues when someone's expressing a concern in a meeting. They don't know maybe that person's behavior or their understanding. So that's what's a little bit messy, and those are the messy parts of life that you as a leader and as an engineer can stand out in. Okay, context is messy, it's informal, and it's thankfully deeply human. The fourth area is values-based decision making, right? So choosing not just what's efficient but what's right. And this is so interesting because at a high level, right, a lot of large language models have some sort of some rules that they follow. But those rules may be different than your values or values that maybe that another person has. And so as a human, you can consider the impact on people, right? You can consider the impact on communities. You can understand maybe some of these long-term consequences beyond just what is efficient, according to an AI chatbot. So now I'm going to kind of pivot here just a little bit because I'm going to tie this back in a little bit, but I want to talk about the hidden costs of money stress. Okay. Here's what a lot of, because this affects you at work, right? When you come to work and you're trying to focus, at work, the hidden costs of money stress. And again, I'll pull this back. You might be thinking, how does this tie in to my work life? I'll explain here in a second. What most workplace productivity discussions miss is personal finance uncertainty, right? There's the statistics. It's about 70%. 70% of people are distracted at least once a day by some money related issue. Okay. Again, it might be I have to pay this bill. It might be I have to take time off work because my babysitter didn't come through and I didn't have enough to pay or whatever. So all those things, right? It follows you into every meeting, every decision, every interaction, and it degrades the performance, because when your mind is distracted, you're less available and responsive at work. So it leads to a reduced focus, right? So you're worried about financial troubles at home. And again, 70% of people experience at least one. I think it's at least one financial stress related decision during the week. that pulls them away from work. So reduce focus, lower confidence, right? You're stressed about money, and so you're second guessing yourself at work. Risk avoidance, right? When you feel financially uncertain, it's hard to maybe take on more work. When you feel like I don't have it all together right now with my finances, it's hard to take on more work at work. And then decision fatigue, right? You're putting more pressure on your brain to worry about financial stress. And so every minor spending decision drains your willpower. By the time you get to work, you might have less energy for those complex professional choices, right? It's like when someone says, hey, be present, be available. It's hard to do that when you're financially stressed out. Why do leaders care about this? Why do leaders think about financial stress? If you think financial stress is purely personal, think again, because leaders, whether they say it or not, whether they tell you this or not, they notice when team members are operating from a place of fear or confidence, right? They can tell, hey, who's all in at the meeting or who's kind of distracted. It affects how not only how they evaluate who's ready for more responsibility, but when they can give that when they give that responsibility to you. And so when you think about, hey, am I showing up, all bringing my full self to work? I know, and that's a very common phrase right now. Bring your full self to work. But when we tie your productivity to the bottom line, a lot of times people, what managers and leaders would actually say is, hey, be fully present at work. Okay. So, how it starts, right? The stressed employees hesitate, right? So they're slower to share ideas. They might be quicker to defer to others because they feel mental overload. Maybe less likely to challenge assumptions. Let's say, oh, well, we'll figure it out later. I have some other things I'm working on. What happens when you hesitate, as in from an individual contributor perspective? That hesitation slows down the team, right? So especially if you're one of the key contributors, when those key contributors hold back, the projects lose momentum, right? People will take time off of work, and then it's hard for people to get more buy-in when you're at work. And so clarity builds credibility. So especially for employees who demonstrate clear thinking, confident communication, strategic judgment, they earn leadership's trust faster. And so while you might not think that financial clarity and confidence can lead me to more confidence at work, the reality is financial clarity strengthens your leadership presence at work. And especially if you're concerned about getting replaced by either AI or someone that knows how to use AI, this is a great way to stand out by being fully present, by taking ownership, by choosing positivity, and being aware of what's happening around you. So when you're not worried about your own stability, right, or own instability, I should say, you can really focus on the problem in front of you. So how is personal finance a leadership skill, right? Most people separate personal and professional development into two distinct categories, but I think that's a mistake. The clearer your personal financial picture, right, the more confidence that you have at home when it comes to finances, the more confidence and the better decisions you'll make at work, right? So you have the same mental discipline at home that you bring that to work, right? Evaluating options, making sound financial choices, right? Resisting impulses to react on things that maybe are leaning on your emotions. When you have more options, you have more confidence, right? When you have a financial cushion, like you have an emergency fund, you can negotiate from strength, right? You can take more calculated career risks. You can speak up, maybe without fear or being worried about, is this going to affect my job? You have less stress, which creates more clearer thinking, right? So if you remove financial anxiety, that frees up cognitive resources to help solve more complex problems. So how do we connect the company goals to your personal goals? And this is how we're bringing it back to being, to standing out, to what I call mission critical money, right? The most strategic employees, right? The most strategic employees understand that career growth isn't about working harder. It's about aligning what you do in your personal day-to-day life with what the organization values most. And I'm curious, what do you think your organization values most? Maybe type it in the chat box. So this is where you have to start thinking through. This requires asking better questions and making more conscious choices about where to focus your energy. So first question here, what does the company value right now, right? Is it growth? Is it efficiency? Is it innovation? Is it risk reduction, right? Understand what is your current strategic focus as a company, and then tie your personal goals to that. And especially as we're thinking, as I know a lot of people are in the middle of their annual performance review, this is a great way, this is a great tie-in to say, hey, my company values these 5 or 10 things. What am I doing to personally advance the company's mission? How does my role support that, right? How can I connect my daily work to the bigger picture? Are you able to articulate how your contributions advance what the company says that their values are? How does financial stability affect your options, right? When you're not living paycheck to paycheck, you can make career decisions based on growth potential, not just immediate survival. There's countless. Maybe you have even made this decision of, well, I don't want to take the risk because I like the financial stability that I'm in right now, or I don't want to work at that startup because I like the safety of this, pension, or working at this company, right? And maybe maybe it was financially driven. What skills make me, the fourth question, what skills make me harder to replace, right? So identify the capabilities that are scarce in your organization and valuable in the market, and then start developing those deliberately, right? Start developing a future-proof plan. Okay, so shifting now to action, right? Future-ready employees. How do I do this well, right? So as AI reshapes the workforce, right? There's a pattern that's emerging. And here's how personal finance and corporate finance tie back in. And yeah, I see a couple of people typed in when I asked the question, what does the company value right now? A couple of people typed in the bottom line. And for good or bad, that's what drives a lot of decisions at companies, right? It is the bottom line, and right, they're trying to bolster profits. And so when you start thinking about, how do I future ready myself to do that well? How do I tie my personal efficiency as an individual contributor to the company's overall engagement? How can I do that? The employees who thrive are not necessarily the most technical or the hardest working. Actually, we probably all know someone who's gotten a promotion where you're thinking, I did the job better than they did, or someone else can do a job better than they do, or they don't know how to run a team. It's not necessarily about being the most technical or the hardest working, right? The ones who combine operational excellence with strategic thinking, those are the ones that are going to stand out. Those people that are future ready and future proofing themselves, they've developed a specific set of capabilities that make them indispensable. The first area is understanding how money flows, right? So they can trace how their work creates. Remember, we talked about value creation, protecting the value, capturing the value, and then managing risk. They understand how money flows, and thankfully, most people, I should say, should understand how money flows in their personal finance life, and then that should hopefully help understand it from a corporate finance perspective. So they see the connection between personal actions and financial outcomes, even if they're not in finance roles, but they understand how the money flows at a corporate level. The second area, they communicate trade-offs clearly. So rather than presenting problems or pushing single solutions, right, they articulate options with honest assessments, right, which is sometimes hard. But they might be able to articulate better than you potentially sometimes some of the trade-offs, right? Remember, we talked about cost versus quality, or short-term win versus long-term gain. Though they can communicate those trade-offs really well. They can make decisions under uncertainty and sometimes under pressure, right? They're comfortable acting without perfect information. Although good data in provides good data out, they know how to evaluate risk and follow up with some of the assumptions that maybe they're making. They know how to make good judgment calls, right? And then they can adjust if new information arrives. And then the fourth area is they align actions with strategies. So they don't just execute tasks, they understand why certain work matters more now, and then they can reprioritize when and if the landscape of AI shifts in the future. So how do you remain competitive, right? What's the real competitive advantage in an era where technical skills are becoming obsolete faster than ever? It seems like, and AI is handling more and more complex tasks. What makes you truly valuable? The funny thing is, I think the answer is surprisingly human, right? It's the ability to think clearly about messy problems. Companies don't promote people for just doing good work, right? They promote people who make their managers' jobs easier, right? Who reduce uncertainty, to spot problems early and help navigate complexity. And that, I think, is one of the areas where AI is going to have it's going to be a very long time before AI can do that really well. So the competitive advantage here is, it's not about working longer hours or having, going back and getting your master's or your doctorate in your field. It's about developing judgment. The judgment to see what matters, the courage to make the calls with imperfect information, and the wisdom to learn from what doesn't work. Okay. Now, the benefit here is when you take risks like this competitive advantage can grow over time. Judgment can grow over time. But we all have an opportunity, right? We all have an opportunity in our daily work, in our daily life, in our personal finances and corporate finance, with our families, right? In relationships, we all have the opportunity to flex that muscle every single day. Right, each trade-off each trade-off that you understand can sharpen your judgment. Each conversation with leadership teaches you their languages, how they speak, but also their concerns. So what does this look like in practice, right? Well, instead of coming to the meeting and saying, well, we should do this project because it's a great idea and I'm excited about it, we should take more of a strategic approach and have a little bit more judgment around what we're saying, right? So we could start off by saying, well, this project addresses our Q3 priority around customer retention, right? Tying it back to the corporate values of the company. What's some of the trade-offs? It delays the other initiatives by 2 weeks. And if we're wrong, here's how much we're out of money, but we have some insights that we can use. And if we're right, we reduce churn by 15%, right? So that's a very simple, simplistic way of taking kind of an average response in a meeting. Hey, we should do this project. To hey, here's how it's tying in to the bottom line. If you're trying to provide a status update, instead of hey, the project's on track, right? You can say hey, we're on schedule, but we identified some dependency risk, right? Talking through some of the trade-offs, right? If you're in a team meeting, right? Average person in a meeting, I think it's like 60% of people in a meeting don't ever say anything or something like that. It's like staying quiet unless directly spoken to, or being the person that's always nitpicking some of the details. Right, start thinking more strategically, using your judgment in the meeting. Right, oh, I see how this connects to the efficiency goal that leadership mentioned, but one risk I'm thinking about is X, Y, or Z. And then you start getting more buy-in at the team level. So again, using our judgment here to hopefully be ahead of the curve from an AI perspective. How can we use that to build our decision-making muscle? Well, like any muscle or any skill, right? Strategic thinking improves with more practice, right? So how do we do this from a day-to-day perspective? Well, if you get a meeting invite, and I'm sure we all have hundreds of these throughout the year, before any meeting, ask why it matters. What decision is being made? What information would help make the decision? How does this fit into the broader priorities of the company or to the value that we can create or capture in the meeting? Come prepared to add value, not just attend. The other thing that I like to do when someone invites me to a meeting, and I'll say, hey, I saw that you invited me to this meeting. How can I best prepare for this meeting? What inputs are you looking for from me? Right. And then if you're getting invited to too many meetings, this is an easy way for people to be like, oh, actually, sorry, I didn't mean to invite you, or I was just inviting your whole group. But if you start asking about, what are the specific things that I can provide to this meeting, that will help. That will help a lot in building that decision-making muscle. Number two, before recommending anything, identify the trade-off, right? Every suggestion has cost, time, money, quality, attention, opportunities, right? There's all these trade-offs that you have to make and have that judgment. So be the person who names it honestly rather than pretending it doesn't exist, right? Be the one that's calling out all the trade-offs that you're having to make as a result of maybe a decision or maybe a lack of decision. Number three, after any decision, right, note what actually happens, right? So start writing down, hey, here's a simple log of here's what we predicted, here was the outcome. Start following up. One thing I never understood when I worked at, I won't say the name of the company, but when I worked at this specific company, after any project win or project loss, we never had a follow-up meeting to say like, what did we learn? What were the lessons learned from this project win or project loss? That struck me as odd because we never really got we never learned, quote unquote, learned our lesson from that meeting or from that experience. And we never had positive feedback or negative feedback. We didn't have any feedback. It just kind of went, people complained, and then we just went on to the next project. And so having that having that follow-up or weekly review that can help communicate, the feedback back to management. And then from a personal perspective, right? How do I time what my personal input is doing to the company? I could read the CEO updates. I could look at quarterly reports. I could understand, strategy memos, or ask your manager, hey, what trade-offs are you trying to manage right now? Is there anything I could help, work through that? What risks are you worried about that I could help manage or start helping work through? What languages, what language are they using? What jargon are they using? Right? Learn to start speaking the way that two levels up are having, right? We used to call those skip level meetings, right? You would skip your manager and start talking like the higher ups, right? So what's the language that leaders speak, right? One of the fastest ways to build credibility with senior leadership is to communicate in the way that they're communicating, right? So not use jargon that they're not familiar with. So maybe instead of saying, right, this is the best solution, you could say, hey, here's 3 options with trade-offs for each. Instead of, well, that's not my department, you could say, well, I see how this affects multiple teams. Maybe we should align before moving forward, right? Taking an extreme ownership approach instead of a lackadaisical approach. Instead of maybe saying, I need approval for this, right? Hey, here's my recommendation and the risk I am managing. I still remember my first job at my first internship, excuse me, at Hewlett Packard. My manager, first day, he said, "Hey, David, at Hewlett Packard, at least in their division, it was the printer division up in Vancouver, Washington. He said, "Hey, David, in our group, we always ask for forgiveness rather than permission." I thought that was the best. It was the best because it always put empowerment back into our hands. Okay. And so it's the same thing for you, right? Strategic language acknowledges constraints, it presents options, it considers implications, and it takes ownership. Okay. And I think that's really what I'm driving home today is taking ownership of judgment calls. It's really the difference between an executor and a thinker. So how does financial literacy come back, right? How do we bring financial literacy back into this, right? One of the interesting things that a lot of people miss is when you understand personal finance and you understand business finance, it's the same skill. In fact, I did another workshop where we evaluated 6 corporate documents and 6 personal finance documents. And the parallels were uncanny on how, if you understand your personal finance, you can relate that back to corporate finance. Both of these, personal finance and corporate finance, both of these require seeing how resources flow. That's all it is. It's taking value, it's capturing the value, it's creating the value, capturing the value, and managing risks, right? Recognizing trade-offs. So what happens when you start looking at your personal finances a lot better and you start to notice things? When you can do this at a corporate level too, you start seeing patterns that other people miss, right? It's being financially literate starts training you to spot inefficiencies, to understand incentives, right? Predict how people will respond to changes, right? Follow the money. You negotiate from strength, right? If you have strong financial clarity in your personal life, you can advocate for yourself more effectively, right? There was a woman I used to work with that was really big into the financial independence movement, and she always spoke her mind in the meetings. And when I asked her one day, I said, what is it that you feel so confident? And she's like, "Oh, I don't actually need this job." I said, "What do you mean?" And we had this long conversation about financial independence. It's actually a very interesting person. But I realized out of that, she was coming from a place of strength because she didn't necessarily feel like she needed the job in order to provide for income because she was financially independent. She had saved and worked and had a really good nest egg. Number 3, you speak your leader's language. Okay. Again, executives think in terms of ROI, right? The bottom line, as someone mentioned in the comments, risk adjusted returns, right? Whether they use those words or not, that's how they're thinking. And so when you think about your personal finances and you can tie those same terms like ROI, return on investment, or opportunity cost, or risk adjusted returns, you can tie those to corporate language, right? It's going to make you stand out in a sea of sameness. And then finally, the last one, you create your career options, right? So when you have a personal financial stability, that means you can pursue opportunities based on learning and growth, maybe not just on salary. Okay, that creates more freedom, and that freedom compounds over a career. So when is the right time, right? When is the right time to get to figure this out? I think it was yesterday, right? Because the second best time is now. You have to start thinking. Understanding money doesn't require having a lot of it, right? The same thing in your career. You don't have to have worked in your career for 20 years before you start speaking up in the meetings, right? It requires just clear thinking and a lot of judgment about what you have, what you need, and what the trade-offs are, right? And this is how we're bridging the gap between financial clarity at home and clarity at work, because that clarity brings a lot of confidence. So some of the common mistakes that hold people back, right? Maybe you're thinking, "Hey, David, yeah, I'm starting to get it. I want to build more judgment into my day-to-day. I want to start taking more ownership, in meetings. I want to start thinking more strategically." Here are some of the common mistakes. Number 1, optimizing for busyness instead of impact, right? There was a lot of, there's a certain company I work for, I won't say the name, but it really rewarded people for working late, right? So if you came in early and stayed late, people were like, "Man, this guy is working a lot," even though maybe the impact wasn't very strong. But here's the reality. Leadership promotes people who make important things happen, not people who appear busy, right? And that's the same thing when it comes to our personal finances, right? I don't want to, if I dumped $100,000 into one investment and $100,000 into another investment, if I got, 80 reports a day from this one investment manager, "Hey, here's all the things that we're doing." But what do you say at the end of the day? So, well, what's the impact, right? What's the value to me? So you can start thinking along those lines as well. Second one, this is another common mistake, avoiding financial conversations, right? And again, I've fallen into this same problem as well, whether it was personal finance or corporate finance, right? You don't go to the CEO meetings, you don't do the skip level meetings, right? You're just focused on what you're doing. You're treating money as a taboo, right? You don't really, oh, I don't really care about corporate profits, which is, maybe you don't, but you have to figure out how does the work that I'm doing on a day-to-day basis tie back in to what the CEOs and the executives and my manager care about, right? Whether it's your negotiating salary or discussing project budgets or understanding competency or company models, avoiding financial conversations is very expensive, right? And in fact, the people that do understand more about corporate finance and what's happening in their company are often the people that stand out more, because they know that the work that they're doing is tied to the bottom line. Number three, common mistake. Number three, waiting for permission to think strategically. Again, as I mentioned before, when I worked at Hewlett Packard, they had this phrase, don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. And again, this kind of goes to strategic thinking is a skill that you can demonstrate, right? You can start operating from a place of permission by thinking strategically. And then number four, confusing loyalty with lack of options, right? If you're staying at your company because being afraid to leave is different from staying because it's the right strategic move. Be mindful of that, right? Be mindful that the former makes you vulnerable, right? The latter makes you powerful. So start thinking through, am I confusing loyalty with lack of options? So those are four common mistakes. So if you're thinking about, well, David, maybe I do need to make a career move, or maybe I do need to make some shifts in my own mental thinking. What are those shifts that I need to make? What do those great career moves have in common? The first one is clarity. Okay, so people that made a standout career move, right? Maybe the promotion that surprised someone, or the lateral move that unlocked some new possibilities, or a risky bet at a startup, right? What are those decisions' common characteristics? First one, clarity. They knew what they wanted and why it mattered. So start with clarity. Then timing. They recognize, right, this is a good window of opportunity, or I'm thinking strategically. So this is, the next 3 months are going to be pivotal. Relationships, right? This is, again, an area that AI cannot replace, is relationships. They had built trust and credibility before asking, right? So they had already, gotten on LinkedIn and started connecting with people. They had already, started to go to maybe networking events and started reaching out to people. Preparation, they develop skills before needing them, right? So again, in your specific job, what are the skills that I need to be relevant in 5 to 10 years, right? As AI is taking more and more work off my plate. Courage, right? They were willing to be uncomfortable temporarily. And then finally, stability, the sixth one. They had enough financial cushion to take those calculated risks. There's so many times, right? Notice that last one, stability, financial stability. There's so many times I've met people that say, man, I wish I could have done X, Y, or Z, but I just didn't have the financial cushion, or I didn't feel confident in my finances to be able to make that bold career move at the right moment. Maybe they had everything else. They had clarity. The timing was perfect. Someone was reaching out to pull them over to do a new company or to start a company. They had prepared mentally, and physically, and from a skill perspective. Maybe they even had the courage, but they just didn't have the financial stability to make that move. They didn't have a 6-month emergency fund to carry themselves and their family for X amount of time to get there. So how can we start using, right, those skills to start getting more noticed, right, or to stand out in an AI economy? Well, here's just a sample plan, right? First month, right? You start thinking more strategically. You start tying your work, your team's work to the higher level corporate company, to the bottom line, or to the values that they say are important. Maybe your manager notices that you're asking better questions. Maybe you're presenting more thoughtful recommendations. Maybe you start building the reputation as someone who really understands, right? Maybe the questions you're asking, show that you have some insight. You're like, oh, this person is actually thinking, oh yeah, the CEO just said this in a conference call on Wednesday. Or hey, because of the the Q4 results are coming out next month, is this something we should be taking on right now, right? You're thinking not just about execution, but about strategy. Maybe your leaders start seeing you as someone who can handle a bigger scope. When opportunities arise, maybe your name starts to come up, right? So again, it's more about being the person that starts coming up because you have executed on having strong judgment and asking better questions, maybe providing more thoughtful recommendations in those meetings. So how do you create your own personal operating system, right? The most successful professionals do not wing it, right? They have some sort of defined plan that they're following. And here's a sample one. You can use this if you like. First baseline here, build adjustment mechanisms. So how will you know when to pivot? Okay. What triggers reassessment? If you're thinking about, hey, I need to get out of this role, I need to prepare myself for the next 10 years, right? From an AI perspective. Having these, these rules prevent both premature quitting and staying too long, right? There's so many people that we know that have stayed in a career way longer than they should. It could be about scheduling regular reviews. I'm not going to go through each one of these just for time. I see we're low on time here. Identifying your key metrics, setting a 3 to 5 year vision, and then defining your non-negotiables, right? So start thinking through, what are the principles that are important to me? And what are those practices that are going to guide my daily decisions? So what's the role of mentorship, right? As I think through, one of the fastest ways to develop strategic thinking is not only to study people who do it well, but to seek them out and reach out to them and say, hey, how do they frame problems in meetings? Maybe ask them. How do they present recommendations, right? How do they handle pushback? How do they communicate with other people in my company? You don't need a formal mentor-mentee relationship, although that will definitely help if you have a formal relationship, but you do need to be deliberate. You do need to be deliberate about how you go about it, right? So maybe you choose someone even though they don't know that, but you start monitoring, hey, how do they answer these questions? How did they know to do something in a situation where maybe I didn't know? And then maybe follow it up. How can I learn from this? And then when's the right time to make your move, right? There's a difference between strategic patience and then getting stuck, right? Analysis paralysis. How do you know when it's the right time to pursue a promotion or switch teams or to leave your career for a new opportunity because AI is pushing you out? Here are a couple of the signals that might indicate that you're ready. Maybe you've mastered your current role. Maybe it feels like I already know all the problems that are coming. I already know who to reach out to. Is that a role that's primed to take over for AI? I don't know. You're visible to decision makers, right? Leadership knows your work and values your judgment. Maybe you've built relationships beyond your team. Maybe you have financial cushion, right? Whether it's 3 to 6 months of expenses, you are ready to step into that next role. When you have, again, these are not all, like, you need to be this 100%, but I would say when you have 80 to 85% on all of these, that's when you probably feel a lot more clarity and confidence making that move. So if you were trying to move from an individual contributor to a leadership, right, you have to start shifting your mindset. From an individual contributor, your value comes from your personal output. As a leader, though, your value comes from multiplying others' output, right? Your success comes from creating clarity for other people. And what you can do is lead up from where you are. So even as an individual contributor, how can you lead up from where you are? How can you develop other people? How can you make decisions under uncertainty? How can you remove obstacles for other people on your team? That's how you upskill in the AI economy. So finishing off here, building resilience for an uncertain future, right? We have all these things that are happening with AI and uncertainty. How can we use these things to our advantage? First area, continuous learning, right? Don't assume that your job or your job function or your manager is going to pour into you the skills that you need to be irreplaceable in the new AI economy. You have to take that upon yourself. Second one, adaptability, right? Be able to thrive in ambiguity. Number 3, financial strength, right? Options, runway, and confidence comes from having financial clarity. Relationship capital. This is one that's often not talked about enough, but having people that you can go to with whether it's questions or knowing reliable information or to help you spot flaws in yourself, right? The relationship capital is huge. And then judgment. Again, coming back to the same word, judgment. It's the developed instinct for what matters, right? Not to listen to the noise, but to focus on where your energy is most valued. So what are some of the questions that separate some of the levels, right? If you're just starting out, right, you might be asking, how do I do this, right? That's what AI can help a lot with. That's why we're seeing a lot of junior level engineers being replaced by AI. But mid-level, right, what's the trade-off here? Senior, what are we optimizing for? And in the executive level, why does this matter? So you can see the how, the what, the why, and the when, all of these questions coming in. So closing it off here, I know we have a few minutes left. How do I make it real for the next, let's just say 30 days? Let's say I was going to take the next 4 weeks and say, week 1, I'm going to observe, right? So attend every meeting with a new lens. What decision is being made? What are the trade-offs? Are they talking about creating value or capturing value or managing risk? What language do the leaders speak here, right? Take a lot of notes, right? You're training your eye to see patterns, right? You're in observe mode. Week 2, application in your next project update or recommendation, right? Explicitly name the trade-off. Well, option A gives us XYZ, and option B gives us, DEF, right? Notice how the conversation starts shifting when you're not giving a specific answer, but you're giving options, right? You're giving options. Week 3, expansion. Have a few conversations with people whose judgment you respect. Maybe it's a manager, maybe it's a leader at your company. Ask them how they think about decisions. What frameworks do they use, right? What do they wish they learned earlier? And then finally, integration, right? Review the past month. What's changed about your thinking? What got easier? What's still hard? Where do you need help? Adjust your approach based on where you are. So finishing off here, what we covered today, right? Mission critical money. Leadership is judgment. It's not a title. So you don't need permission to think strategically. Money, number 2, money is the language of decisions, right? Every strategic choice in business ultimately connects to resource allocation, value creation, and risk management. Number 3, financial clarity fuels confidence, right? So personal financial stability isn't separate from your personal growth. And then finally, AI rewards better thinkers, not busier ones, right? Let AI do what it's good at: automation, handling more tasks, right? Kind of low level thinking, right? Executing on tasks. You focus on judgment calls. Your premium should be shifting to judgment, to context, and to relationship building. So that's mission critical money. How understanding money decisions and trade-offs make you more valuable, trusted, and promotable. And again, this kind of common theme that we came out with, which is judgment beats automation. So with that, thank you so much, Jonathan, and IEEE-USA for the opportunity here to present.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, David. So I know we're just about out of time. And I know we went over a lot of content today. So David, just my final question to you before we close things off. How can viewers follow up with you for more personalized questions after the webinar?
Yeah, I think, the best way is to follow me on LinkedIn. And so if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, I post there a lot. I'm pretty active there. I post different events that I'm hosting, different things that I'm speaking at. So feel free to reach out there. I'll put a link to that in the chat box, and feel free to, like I said, reach out if you'd like on LinkedIn. Connect with me on LinkedIn.
And folks, we have also included David's LinkedIn in the ticker at the bottom of the screen as well. So I guess David, actually, so one question from our audience members asking if the slides will be available. Folks, we can follow up with David following the webinar to see if he provides permission to share the slides. Otherwise, we do have the recording from today's webinar, which will be available on IEEE-USA's channels. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, so all right, everyone. Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today. David, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your valuable insights with our audience. You're always fantastic to have you with us.
Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate that.
And thank you to our audience members for your great questions as well. A couple of announcements before we close things off today. First up, clear your calendars and get ready for an event like you've never experienced before. In October 2026, the inaugural IEEE-USA Big Thinkers Conference will bring together the brightest minds from across a wide range of industries and disciplines to accelerate the professional growth and leadership skills of early and mid-career professionals. Sign up for email updates through the link provided. Next up, in case you missed the announcement, IEEE-USA's cruising saga continues in 2026 back to the Bahamas. IEEE-USA will be hosting a 4-day Bahamas cruise from October 5th through the 9th, 2026. We'll be cruising in style aboard the Carnival Glory from Port Canaveral, Orlando to Nassau, and then to Celebration Key before concluding our cruise back in Florida. Cabins are starting to fill up, so make sure you book yours with the best prices and with enough time to plan for a great trip. If you enjoyed the content presented in today's webinar, please be sure to check out our extensive catalog of other presentations and publications available on demand on our website for your viewing pleasure. And if you haven't yet, please be sure to like and subscribe to our social media channels, and don't forget to check back daily for updates on upcoming events. Have a great day, everyone.
私は橋本貴子と言います。In my research, we are developing social media analytics algorithms. Using our technology, we can make our society better. Thanks to IEEE, I have a good network all over the world, and I became a global leader. I believe IEEE will give many opportunities for your career development. IEEE is my competitive edge.